Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another SG Connect. You will see the familiar face to my left, Jason Rummel. Welcome.
Thank you. It's been a while. I'm glad to be back.
It has been a while, and the reason it's been a while, Jason is a pastor here at Saving Grace Church, but he is also a teacher, and that's what he does in the full-time days. And we've been in a pandemic, so that made things crazy this year.
Yes, but school is out for the summer. So
it's over, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually over tomorrow.
It's actually over tomorrow.
And but I roped you in now.
Well, right. Except by the time they see this, it will have been over for a week.
Yeah.
Right? So we're living in the future.
Here we go. Well, today's subject is the subject of covenants. So this is a subject that maybe is undertaught in our church at times, but we've been going through the book of Exodus, so we've begun to teach about it. And Jason has preached, by the time this is aired, a sermon on all of the covenants of the Bible. So one sermon kind of covering the covenants of the Bible. And so we're just going to talk about that for a bit tonight and see why that's important to understand. So first question, Jason, why would you do a sermon on the covenants?
Well, that's a great question, Joe.
Thank you.
So just as a reminder, we've talked about covenants a couple of times in various sermons, and if you haven't caught any of that, the working definition that we've been using when we talk about covenants is a solemn commitment guaranteeing promises or obligations undertaken by one or both covenanting parties. So it's this solemn commitment. And the one thing that we've been careful to remember is that the promise that comes with the covenant is not the covenant itself. The covenant is the commitment or the guarantee that none of these promises will fail. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, why would we be worried about the covenants? Well, I've found in my own study of the Bible over years that sometimes you can look in a particular place, particularly the Old Testament, because it's larger and it's got a lot of different types of writing and a lot of crazy events that are way outside of our normal experience, that you can study passages that seem like they're very isolated. Like, why is this even in here? Why is it important? What does it mean? And it can be hard to see how that connects to anything. But if you look at the covenants that the Lord has made with his people from the beginning of Scripture to the end, you start to see that it all ties together. Mm-hmm. And these little isolated events all of a sudden start to make sense because they're like puzzle pieces that fit into the bigger picture. Some of you may be familiar with a group called the Bible Project. They do a lot of online videos. You can find them on YouTube. They're all free. They're fantastic. I highly recommend them. But one thing that they say a lot, and I'm going to completely steal their catchphrase here, is they say, we believe that the Bible is one unified story that points to Jesus. And I couldn't agree with that more. The Bible is one unified story instead of all of these isolated things. It's one unified story that points to Jesus. So the reason I've felt like I wanted to cover this topic is to help people to see that it's all pointing to Jesus, his first coming that we can study about in the New Testament, and his impending second coming. It's all pointing to Jesus. And so if you can kind of capture that, it makes your Bible study make a whole lot more sense.
Yeah, and I'm not telling you something you don't know. This is a very big book, and so you can just get lost in the details. And the theme of covenants is one that really quickly unifies the details. So I think all of us have had experiences where we're reading through in the Old Testament or in the New Testament genealogies, long lists of names.
Yes.
Well, if you understand covenants, you will see how they connect to the big redemptive storyline of the Bible, rather than just being a whole bunch of different names that are hard to pronounce.
Correct. And I think you've probably heard it a lot of times from pastors beyond just the ones here at Saving Grace Church, but we tend to hit those parts of the Old Testament and just kind of skim right over them. And I'll admit that I still do that sometimes. I still do that sometimes.
Confession.
But
I'm a pastor.
But what you see is, starting from the very first covenant that the Lord made with Adam, and you just go right to the next one. He made a covenant with Noah, and in between there is a genealogy. And if you go through that genealogy and you start connecting the dots of just name to name through these families, you see that the Lord did that and included that to show that he was faithful to that very first covenant that he made with Adam. It does not fail.
Right. And we're going to get into this a little bit more, but the big idea of the covenants that we're going to be talking about is that God is the maker, initiator of them, and God is faithful and trustworthy. And so yes. We'll see that throughout the whole line. So as Jason said in his sermon, different pastors and scholars break down the number of covenants in different ways. But the way that you landed was with 5 in the old and 1 in the new, correct?
That is correct. They're the ones that would be left over. I've seen them counted as high as 8. So really I just left out 2. Are either kind of not like very clearly covenants, or they're just kind of restatements of a previous covenant. And so some scholars would give that a separate name, call it a new, like not a new covenant, but a different covenant.
Sure.
But we felt it was kind of most clear to stick to these 6.
Right, that's correct. So put you to the test from memory, run through the 6 real quick.
Okay, so the first one would be the Adamic covenant, and then it would move on to the Noahic covenant. These are, all of them except for one are named after people. So Adam, Noah. Then the next one would be the Abrahamic covenant. Then the Mosaic covenant, which we just finished that series in Exodus, so we're probably all most familiar with that one.
Right.
After the Mosaic covenant would come the Davidic covenant, which would be named after King David. And then finally, the 6th one that we're covering is the New Covenant.
Which communion is a celebration of the New Covenant.
Yes.
So let's go backwards. So the first one, one of the interesting things about the first one is that the word covenant actually doesn't show up in Genesis 1, 2, or 3. But we, like many other Bible teachers, believe that there was a covenant with Adam and Eve. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and not only would scholars agree that there was a covenant with Adam and Eve, but most would say that it's like the foundational covenant that just drives all the rest. Like it's I use this fancy word. I didn't invent it. It's it's just a word that comes up when you study these things. It's called proto-evangelium. Am I saying that right?
Sure.
But it's just sort of close enough. In English, it basically means that it is the first presentation of God's redeeming work that he intends to complete through Jesus.
First good news.
It's the first good news. Yeah, literally what it means. It's the first good news. So, so we want to talk a little bit about what that covenant is or where it happens. So it's not an unknown story. God created man, Adam and Eve, and placed them in a garden, and they were created in his image and without sin. But they didn't remain that way. There was a temptation of Eve. They fell. Adam committed sin. And when God then spoke about this, he spoke to the serpent first. Mm-hmm. And right in that passage, when he's speaking to the serpent, is where the covenant is found. And what he states in verse 14 of Genesis 3 is, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust it you shall eat all the days of your life. And then here's the important part. Here's the covenant. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, on the surface, that doesn't seem like it's talking about Jesus.
That
doesn't seem like the first good news, right? It's talking about this unnamed offspring and the bruising of heads and heels. But what it's pointing to is, in the line of Adam and Eve, there is going to come an offspring from the woman who is going to bruise, and some translations even say crush. This offspring is going to crush the head of the serpent. But the serpent is also going to have an effect. He's going to bruise the heel of this offspring. And it's pointing to when Jesus on the cross is going to suffer, but his head is not going to be crushed. Right. Just his heel is going to be bruised. He's going to suffer this, but it's not going to be conquered. He's going to be victorious over death and victorious over the serpent, right. Satan.
Yeah, and one of the things you said in your sermon that I thought was really striking, having just come out of Exodus, pre-sin entering the world, before Adam and Eve rebelled, all the temple tabernacle requirements were not in existence when Adam and Eve were made pre-sin. They could have perfect relationship with the Lord at all times.
Yeah, and the amazing thing about that is, as we go through these covenants and as you study covenants, it's almost like, I think of it like a circle. You know, like if we start in the garden with God being with his creation, and there's nothing separating them from God. There's no need for a temple. There's no need for anything to be made holy because they're just with God and sinless. Right. And you follow this arc all the way through the story, and that's where it ends too. Like when Jesus comes again and fulfills all these covenants, that's what we have to look forward to, being face to face with God, unashamed, no need for a temple. We'll just be with him.
Yeah, and from the pre-fall moment of Adam and Eve to the future moment where Christ returns, we're in this in-between time where God's story continues to unfold. And so we're going to walk through the covenants now.
Yes.
So sin entered the world, Adam and Eve sinned, and there's this really striking verse in chapter 6, verse 5, where Moses writes this. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intentions of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. To me, that's one of the most